everyone. Welcome to day 2 of your 51st Annual General Assembly. As we start our day, I'll turn it over to Elder Jewel Thomas to start us off in a good way at microphone 1.
Get this out of here. I can't get this out of here. Oh. Good morning, everyone, and thank you. Welcome again to Musqueam. I have a short prayer for you today. Lord, bless this gathering, help them to open their minds, hearts, and spirits. May they receive comfort and inspiration. Bless your families at home. Bless people with chronic pain. Thank you for this day, and thank you for our blessings. God bless the children. I also have another short one here called Prayers in the Wind. My heart had a feeling to pray for you today. Whatever your needs, I pray they're on the way. I ask for God's blessing to give you lots of strength, to give you overflowing love, whatever be the length. Ask Him for sweet patience to bear with irritating souls. Ask Him for endurance for each and all your goals. Amen.
Heichka, thank you, Auntie. So inviting forward Elder George Settleman for his Elder's Report. Could you come forward, please, George? And just a few housekeeping things while George makes his way up here. Just a reminder that this is webcast. If at any point during the day you'd like to reconsider that, make it known to me. Reminder of the David Dennis fundraisers, the jacket and hat that's outside, the 50-50 that's taking place. And also don't forget about our vendors out in the hallway. There's a lot of good items out there, and I encourage you to take a look and open up your wallets to support those vendors when you're able to. Microphone 4.
As Priest Wheel, otherwise known as George Saddleman, I'm here as a proxy for Upper Nicola Indian Band as well as Elder Rep for on the CEC. I'd like to thank the Musqueam for allowing us to be here to do our business again. Also certainly like to thank the lady that said the opening prayer. I always think about that because one of the things that the elders always tell me when I was growing up, pray for the people, don't forget us. So I appreciate those moments, so it keeps me in mind of the kind of things that I'd like to promote. I do have a one-pager document. I'll just review it. I do have a resolution that's coming forth. I don't know when the resolution is going to be presented today or tomorrow. So keep an eye open for that. One of the things that, as an elder rep, I see a lot of institutional work going on through the province with Indigenous groups, not only with my own band, but with other bands. But we don't seem to communicate the good deals that are coming through for the elders. But one thing that really strikes me is the post-traumatic issue. I read a lady that did a doctorate paper on that issue alone. It's about a 230-page issue talking about the post-traumatic stress. And I think we all carry that. And I think if we can find a way to deal with it, some of us deal with it in an individual way, some of us deal with it as a group in the community or in the region. But there is a lot of things that we need to think about because of the fact that we are shackled with the kind of things that goes on with our people. And certainly the government is certainly promoting those kind of things. When I look at the principles about how they deal with us, in my research and looking at things happening through the country, I came across a book in a bookstore. And the issue that was discussed in that whole book is called Law and Development Doctrine. Very interesting read because of the fact that the Constitution of Canada is an economic document, and it all revolves around economic development, and we know that. But they use this law and development doctrine to do a number of things with us. They certainly divide and conquer our people, our leadership, got us pitting against one another over whatever capacity resources that are coming. And if you're not part of the team, as we've seen the federal government use that issue, one of our esteemed leadership wasn't part of the team, got knocked out of the system. They're very astute about what they want done. And I've seen on Facebook the applaud that some of the MPs and senators, when they knocked down the whole issue of cultural appropriateness. We've been battling that for a long time. And that adds to the post-traumatic syndrome. When I think about the elders that have come along, and the elders that I've talked to said, we sit at the back and listen to you kids. If you notice that when you go to a meeting, the elders sit at the back, listening to what we're saying, seeing if we're promoting our cultural values and principles, the teachings that our people have taught us. And if we don't, then we don't get support. They'll just say, oh, George Saddleman is just trying to better himself. But there'll come a time that he'll come and ask us for help. And that's what happens to us. We forget to ask the elders for help because they've been around a lot longer. And the Tamil has been, what we respect is around a lot longer than us. Part of the healing process of our own self has been told to me. When you go to the Tamil, you go to the mountains, you go there and look for that big fir tree, 2-3 feet wide or whatever, the oldest tree you think, and you talk to that fir tree. Tell them your problems. That tree has been around a lot longer than a lot of us. You talk and you make an offering, ask for forgiveness and ask for guidance. So that's one part of our healing process that I've learned over the years. As I listen to the elders, at least from my home area, one elder told me, don't forget, kids, you got the power. I thought about it for a long time. Where we get our power from is from the language, from the oral stories, from our songs and our ceremonies. So those are the kind of things I think about when I go to meetings, and how does that work, especially when we're dealing with institutional arrangements that we have with the province or Canada. It makes it pretty difficult for us to sit around and have traditional instructions and listen to what has happened. The divide and conquer process has got us big time. There's a few times I've seen the leadership at this table come together. There might have been a little bit of rumblings in the back, but I was there when we rejected the funds in Chilliwack. I was there. A lot of commotion, a lot of emotion, a lot of strong words. And we're still living with those consequences today. We can see that kind of blockage or barrier to the kind of work that we want to do if you look at the Treasury Board directives. We've got to have good governance. Our style of governance has no room within the process. A lot of us are doing, at least myself, doing research on our own traditional style of governance. It's way different from what the Treasury Board commits. So if we don't follow the rules, then we're not part of the team, then they find some way to take away the capacity and resources. You look at our contribution agreements that we make, that we sign with different entities, governmental entities. They always talk about we have to have good governance. And if your membership get out of line, it's up to us chief and councils to put them back into place. So it's a pretty mean game that we're playing. Somehow we need to, I heard yesterday, somehow we need to do some collective work. And I think I've been looking for that collective work for a while. I remember in, I think it was 1993, we all started moving away from the table. I think officially the Nishkas moved away. But it was been told that one day that we'll come back to the table and do that collective role. I've seen us come back to the table, but it didn't last too long. It just lasted for that one meeting. So this is what the elders are looking at. When are our leaders going to get together and deal with our rightful role? And when they do that, they think about the abuses they have had. Things that our people do in the community, to most of us, that's not normal. That's not the normal way of doing things. But our people have been carrying on the abusive process so long, they think it's a normal thing, what they do. And they just laugh when I talk to them. I said, you shouldn't be doing that. Who are you to tell me? So you can see it very live. You know, as leaders, we sacrifice a lot of our time. We have a Chief Deputy story, how food was given, and it describes how we suffer. So those are the kind of things I look to as I move forward in the latter part of my life. I first started working with the Union of Chiefs, I think it was 1973 or somewhere around there. I was the accounts payable. And certainly it's a lot different from what goes on today. I remember going accounts payable, because at the time we're doing what they call consultation rounds. And my job was to receive travel expense forms and pay out the delegates. It was quite the time. And I had to pay out cash. So I'd go to the local bank in Williams Lake or Vernon or Prince George or wherever and get a wad of cash out, about $3,000 or so. So it was a pretty exciting time. I think about it now. I used to travel at the time with Chief Adam Enius. I was his, he calls me saddlebags. And he still calls me saddlebags today. So there's a lot of stories that each of our communities, each of our areas want to share. We haven't got enough time here. I noticed our agenda calls for just a half an hour presentation or something. There's not enough time, so we have to make time. I'm a student of our culture. One of the things I've certainly learned was that we do have what they call, I call it Tamik Protocol. And that comes, in our language, comes from Giuseppe times. It comes from a long time ago. As a tribal group, we'd meet once a year. But as the Interior Salish people, we met every 4 years. And those places were in the Nicola Valley, just a few kilometers from where I live. So I think about those things. We need to get back to that spirit because our elders, ancestors from yesterday, I can feel them when I go to those places. I don't know about you people, but certainly I could feel them here. That's when I take a moment and say a prayer, introduce myself, let the ancestors know who I am and what I'm doing there. So those are the kind of things that we need to do, get back to our way of doing things. Sure, it's nice to have an institution because the institution has to interact with the government somehow. The government can't interact with our institution because there's no mechanism. There's Section 35, they're trying to figure out how to do that, but they're having a hard time. So we must come together with all our accumulated wisdom and knowledge from 1970, or whenever the union first started. I was going to Caribou College, as it called at the time. I was taking my accounting 1. I was sitting in the classroom, and then I could know that there's something happening over at the Kamloops School. 2 of us were sitting there. We should take the day off and go listen to those chiefs. But we were so in tune to being in the class that we were sitting there. So I do have a concept document. I did present it once upon a day, but it was told to me at the time, the capacity and resources, we have to account for the past capacity and resources, so maybe George bring it back to the next meeting. So a couple of meetings have gone by now, and I've had the opportunity, and I'm certainly first on the agenda, thank you. And so my request is seeking the Union Chief's resolution to support this initiative in order to make application to NRT and other like organizations for funding. And the steps are develop a budget, make application, seek potential funding sources, engage qualified First Nations. That was the other thing. The consultant I was going to use didn't have a good name with some of the leadership at the table, so I let that person go on his way. And the whole idea is to create a focus group, very principled. Let's not get into the details. Let's talk about principles, about what we need to do forward, not only to support the elders, but certainly support the leadership, because there's a great lots of knowledge still out there. Certainly develop a summary document for the table here, and test the implementations of the policy. So those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about very principally. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for your time, and watch for my resolution.
Thank you, George. Sorry, thank you, George. If there's no questions or comments for George, would you like to go directly to the resolution? I see some nodding. It was distributed as George started. So, George, if you could stay there to answer any questions that might arise. So you've got the concept paper in front of you that explains the nature of the request. So I'll draw your attention to draft resolution 2019-60 regarding developing policy to address elders' abuse and neglect. Therefore, we resolve UBCIC in Assembly support UBCIC Elders Representative George Saddleman's initiative to develop an elders abuse and neglect policy. And therefore, it finally resolved UBCIC Chiefs in Assembly, direct the UBCIC executive and staff to work with the UBCIC Elders Representative to develop an elders abuse and neglect policy, subject to available resources, and upon completion to share and distribute the policy at UBCIC Chiefs Council assemblies and other gatherings to educate elders of their rights and caregivers of their responsibilities. Is there a mover?
Yes, I will.
Moved by George? Sorry, moved by...
Yes, I'll move that resolution, proxy for Upper Nicolet.
Thank you, George. Seconder, Mike 7.
Gananook, Travis Hall, Celtic Tribal Council proxy.
Mike 7, please.
Gananook, Travis Hall, Celtic Tribal Council proxy for Marilyn Slett.
Thank you. Any discussion? Mike 18.
Chief Janet Webster, just a friendly amendment on the top where it says redeveloping policy to address elder abuse, neglect and exploitation, and therefore be it resolved on the first one at the end to add, the second one. Therefore be it finally resolved that the UBCIC Chiefs and BCAFN Elder Rep in Assembly direct the UBIC, getting mixed up here. On the first, therefore, after the policy, to add exploitation. And then under the second, therefore, it be resolved after Chiefs and BCAFN Elders Rep to work with the committee, with the elders. Sorry, I hope you got that.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying because I'd like to thank the policy analysis staff here for trying to put together a first draft, and I appreciate any changes or recommendations and what you're mentioning, I accept. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a bit of a point of order. I don't think a union resolution can direct another organization's elders rep to work with us. The background document that George provided does have like-minded organizations working together. So for your second suggested amendment, I would say leave that to the backup document because there's room in there, but definitely adding exploitation to the end of the first therefore. Like 17.
Why is Queen Kilochin Kintel Milmil Til, Chad Enos, chief of the Penticton Indian Band? I would just make a suggestion on the final whereas in point 2, where it suggests making an application to the new relationship trust. I would suggest making an application and striking the limiting factor of only to the new relationship trust. I would say something in the effect of making an application for funding to multiple organizations for policy development. I make this suggestion because I think there's a correlation between the new Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions in terms of how you might access funding to support the initiative.
Thank you, Chief. I'll draw your attention to the concept document with the numbered section down below where it says number 2 speaks to the NRT like you just referenced, but number 3 speaks to seek other potential funding sources for the project. I think that's covered fairly. Any other discussion? Are we prepared for question? Question's been called. Any not in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing neither, the resolution is carried. Thank you. Any concluding remarks, George?
I'd just like to thank the floor for taking a moment to look for some work that we need to do with the elders, certainly. Right, Limnamt?
Limnamt for you. So now bear with us for a moment while we get ready for the next agenda item, which is honoring your president. inviting forward our host, Musqueam drummers, inviting the family to come forward and get ready. We're going to do it just to my front left right here, so everybody can see appropriately. So just bear with us for a moment, please. And just while we're waiting, acknowledging Regional Chief Terry TG. Welcome to the Chiefs Council, AGA. Robert Phillip, I missed your acknowledging you yesterday. Glad you could make it back today from the First Nations Summit. Yes, and Ray Harris as well from the First Nations Summit. Good to see you. So going to turn the floor over to Julis from the Musqueam family here is going to provide an honor song and share some words with our Grand Chief here in recognition of his beginning his 8th term as President of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. And in addition, like the added flavor is that in by acclamation again, we just want to kind of pause our work and recognize and honor our beloved Grand Chief in that regard. Julis, yeah.
Hi, Chikasiam. It's an honor again for me and my family to be here with you this morning to share another honor song to recognize one of our wonderful leaders that's always there for the community, always there for the people. And once I found out who we were singing for, it brought me back to Cessnoom, the city before our village of Cessnoom, where Chief Phillip would be come down and visit with us once in a while and come and hang out and support the Musqueam people. So it's, you know, great, wonderful leaders like that that are examples for the future, you know, the children. Not only himself, but all of you, you know, all knowing we're all there for our people, elected, you know, on behalf of our people and being the voice for our people. And I just wanted to share that with the people and Chief Philip for, you know, being there for the community, being there for the people, always supporting everyone that needs that support. And this honor song that we're going to sing comes from our friends and relatives from Lummi, Washington, just northwest of Bellingham. Patrick George and Anton George composed this song, and they gave us the okay to share it with the people, gave us we have the permission to share it with the people, so we want to share this honor song with you, Chief Philip, for the wonderful work that you have done in the past and the wonderful work that you're going to continue doing for the people. So with that, we'll share this song.
Chapka CM, thanking your Musqueam family for stepping forward and honoring our loved one here with an honor song. Inviting forward Elder George Saddleman. Would you come forward and share some words, please? Any representatives from the Okanagan that would help Chief Inias with an honor song as well? You're encouraged to come forward.
Wai limlim tali khasn kunim yati yal michum. I guess I want to say a few things on behalf of the Penticton Indian Band and the drive-by Stuart's house when he's outside chopping wood. He still does that, you know. I just want to express a little bit from grassroots kind of perspective. When I got elected, Stuart told me, you know who put me in as chief? It was the people from up the hill. And our elders and our ancestors, in that same light, I think Stuart has really expressed the traditional values of our people, especially from Penticton, in terms of defending and protecting title and rights and speaking on behalf of those who can't speak for themselves, like the Tamich, the salmon, the environment, and even the people who are not in our forums, in our meetings, but the people that are at home in our communities. So I thought about it a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit, because I'm not as green as Stuart, but there's a word, I'm a student of the language, and we hear it often. I've done a little bit of analysis on the word breakdowns of temich and temhulauch, and I just want to express one part of that word, and it's tum, because a lot of speakers that are fluent aren't educated in linguistics or phonetics, but I've had the fortune to be exposed to that a little bit. And that word tum, if you think about being in a blizzard, and there's a group of you, you know somebody's ahead of you, but there's nobody that you're following, and there's nobody that's leading. If you think about being in a blizzard, and you can't see what's in front of you, and you have this feeling that your life and everything that you know depends on you. And I think what you represent is what this organization represents and what our people represents, as if our life depends on it. So I just wanted to share that with you in our language, timhulauch, timich. You hear it all the time as if our lives depend on it. And that's not just humans, that's our world that we live in. So I wanted to share that a little bit with this honoring of you, because I think that's what you represent. And I want you to hear me say that. Sometimes we need to vocalize things, and I'm trying to enunciate properly. But this song I'm going to sing, it's called 1 Day, 1 Month, and 1 Year. and it represents the courage that it takes that you've expressed. It expresses the determination. I've been here more than 1 year, so I can't sing it that many times, but it represents that everlasting spiral that needs to continue in terms of preserving who we are. So I'm going to try not to butcher it. And I want to express my gratitude for everybody to be here for this as well. Anybody got a drumstick? There's a rattle in here. And our relatives, I also want to express that we do have relatives here. And I'm certainly happy that you're here. This is the expression of our nations and our relationships within our tribes. So I was just saying that we have one of our relatives from here that's living here, and I think this is a real expression of the honoring, is that the relationships that we have with each other are so important. So thanks for being here. Hi, hi, ya, ya, hi, ya, ya, hi, ya, ya, yo, ya, hi, ya, hi, ya, hi, ya, yo.
George calling.
Why, words for Stuart is hard to find, especially in the English language. But if we're fluent in our own language, a lot of our old people have lots of things to say. I've sat at the same meeting tables with Stuart, probably even some of the roadblocks, because we were radicals once upon a day. But it's been told to me that there'll come a time when the younger generation come up. I'm thinking that'd be the 7th generation. And certainly Stuart is leading the way, however hard it is to do. But it's been told to me that our younger people are going to be very creative and innovative in their thinking, especially through the cultural process. There's going to be a new day for us. Our job is to stand up the principles of our culture so that they won't forget. Certainly in the language, as we know, that's where our laws come from. Our songs, as we hear, pays tribute to the things that we do. And certainly our ceremonies have a lot to do with things. So those are the kind of principles I think about. And certainly Stuart stands up for those kind of things. Through thick and thin, through the courts and through the whatever. It's a tough job. Like I say, the How Food Was Given story, it talks about how the 4 food chiefs stood there. One of the comments from the leaders not so long ago said, our chiefs make a sacrifice so that our people to be. So certainly Stuart has sacrificed a lot over the years. And there's many of us in the crowd that have done the same thing. I did a quick calculation yesterday in the leadership role that I'm in. 44 years that I've been around. So I've been there and back, and I certainly enjoy the work that I do. Even sometimes you have to sacrifice more than what you could because of the fact that you have to travel away from your family, and like Stuart. And our old people always say they pray for me every day when I'm gone, and I appreciate that. So those are the kind of things I think about when I work alongside Stuart. I've never seen him get cranky. I'm the one that gets cranky, I guess, but I see Stuart very peaceful, and he's thinking probably inside his stomach is growling because he's hungry or something. But those are the kind of things that I think about. So when we sit at the tables, I think about the Tamika Protocol. Like I say, the Interior Salish people used to come together every 4 years. I think that the common thing was that we were related. My relatives on my mom's side, we come from Fountain. And my relatives on the other side, my grandma's side, I'm in Chilean, but I make their home in Italy. So I got relatives all through the country. Friends as well. So when we get into a moment, we always like to think about our relatives, the common things that we all agree to, and certainly the support that needs to happen. We need to do that more often. I've been to a few ceremonies and longhouses down here in the coastal area. Very awesome. Very awesome. I like that. I like the song that the people sang. Reminds me of when we had the mask dance here, just down over here somewhere. Awesome. I've never witnessed like that. And it's not open to the public, but it was open to the chiefs. So those kind of things bring back memory of the work that we do. I imagine I have all kinds of other stories, but I'll just leave it at that. And I'd like to thank Stuart and his good wife Joan for sacrificing all the things that they do. Why Limnum?
Limnam Twiu, Regional Chief, would you come forward, please?
Masai Sodesni, Musqueam people, thank you for allowing us in the territory. My name is Terry Tiji. I'm from Tackle Lake First Nation. Mukshwim Simgi, wolf with a white spot in the head. I'm from about 900 kilometers north of here. And I was thinking about what I should say today. And in the many travels of this man, 8 terms, 21 years, and I can only think of the experiences that I had with him. When I was first elected as the vice chief of the Carrier-Secondary Tribal Council, Stuart came up to my community, which is 5.5 hours north of Prince George, 3 hours on dirt road. And he faced the music at that time because it was the issue throughout the province was the rights recognition legislation. And many of my chiefs and hereditary chiefs were pissed off, mad. And Stuart was the only one that showed up and sat there and took it all in a very graceful way and said, yeah, perhaps the way we did this was wrong. And then we showered him with a bunch of gifts. So here I am, give him another gift. But every time I came calling, Stuart was the one that showed up, and in our fight against Enbridge Northern Gateway Pipeline, every time we had a function, whether it was here or north in Prince George or on the land, Stuart was there. And up north, I also recall, and when I became the tribal chief, the Lake Babine accident with the mill workers and the injustice there for the mill workers to receive some sort of justice. We had a protest, and Stuart showed up in his wheelchair just after his motor vehicle accident. And more recently, you know, those are the many times, and more recently with the rest of the Leadership Council, he showed up at the big bar slide. We went there and visited and see what was going on and talk to the people, but also Stuart was there to speak up for, you know, those things, the environment, and those things that don't have a voice. So as a recognition, on behalf of the myself and the British Columbia Assembly First Nations Board, my elders and youth, I have a gift here for you, many of your years of service. And it was, hello? And this was, we commissioned this, and a young man, Clayton Gauthier from Nakazli Wuten. It's a piece of artwork, a drum. It's called Prayers for the Salmon. So this is on behalf of all of us. I'm sure that many of us here really appreciate the work you do. Masai Cho.
I knew you were going to say that.
Masai Cho, Regional Chief. Cookby.
Tip, on behalf of our UBCIC Chiefs Executive, we really appreciate everyone for being here today to witness and honor Stuart, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip. He spends a lot of hours on the road, and he makes it to wherever he's going. When he did have his accident, I was asked to step in a bit, and I tell you, it was a hard job. I barely made it to all the places I was supposed to go, and there was high expectations in each of the communities. It's not just the leadership that you see, it's the people, the elders, the grandmothers, the kids. So he has quite a network out there that he has built over the years, but it's also built on respect, because he's never ever steered from those principles and those high values. And I just want to say I really appreciate Grand Chief Stuart Phillip for all he's doing and how he's still continued to walk in the ancestral way of our people. And he hasn't steered from that, because it is about protection of the water, protection of the land, protection of our rights, and what the Union BC Chiefs was founded on in 1969. So we haven't wavered from that position, and it's very clear. He was very clear with me when I started. We can only do what we have resolutions and directed by the chiefs, and that's the bedrock, the bottom principle. So whatever the chiefs' tables are here is deciding, that's how we're directed. And he hasn't ever steered out that. Sometimes I would get all excited about a lot of different things. He'd say, hold on here, what does the resolution say? So thank you for that guidance and wisdom. And most of all, appreciation to our Union BC Indian Chief staff. Many of them have been here for years and years. I think Arnold holds the high one for being here the longest, and Mildred's here today too. And I really appreciate all the work that we do for our chiefs and for our proper title holders, our people at home. So Cook's Cham, thank you.
CM the Soljuan, CM the Ciea, Heitzepka, Quatsi Tsapmi, Tachel Namat Tinaquail. My dear elders, relatives who are here today, I just want to express my appreciation for the beautiful work that took place. My name is Qualtlitston. I also carry a Nuu-chah-nulth name, Kinhuth. I am Chief of Sartlip and Vice President here at UBCIC. I just want to express my gratitude for Grand Chief and all of the work that he's done, and for an up-and-comer younger leader. I really looked up to Grand Chief for all that he's done. He's come to our community many times in Sartlip, and he's come to community meetings where our band members are screaming and they're fighting, and he had an opportunity to witness that, and I was a little bit embarrassed of that, but he came up to me and said, you know, it kind of reminds me of a bit of my community, and to see the way there was a mother who stood up and said, who didn't appreciate people firing their guns so close to her home, and he just really made me feel comforted, and he has that great humility and that great ability to just make you feel at peace and to make you feel content in his presence. And so I just want to say that I've always looked up to Grand Chief, and I could sit and listen to his old war stories of whether it's occupations, occupying fisheries offices, roadblocks. I could sit and listen to him all day, and I have, and I will continue to do. But just wanted to share today that what an honor it is to serve with you on the executive, and what a dream job this is for me. And I just I look forward to every time that I meet with you and to sit with you, and you make being a chief very pleasant with your support, not only politically but personally. You've always been there for me. When I received my Swaihwe mask, Grand Chief Stuart was there as well, who accepted the invitation and came to the island. So I always just feel very special in your presence, and just want to raise my hands to you.
Thank you, everyone. So we'll leave the final comments to the Grand Chief.
Why? You squeezed Aimshin. I just want to thank my Coast Salish relatives, the Musqueam, Squamish, and particularly Tsleil-Waututh for the opportunity to be here and witness the honoring of my husband. We've been married a long time, but more importantly, we've been sober for 30 and 32 years now. And that's really when our life began. And when I first met Stuart, actually he met me through a book that my sister wrote called Bobby Lee, Indian Rebel, and there was a little bank of pictures in there, and one of the photographs was just my face, and I was wearing a choker, and he bought the book, and he kept looking at that picture over and over and over. He never did read the book. So I had an opportunity at one time to thank my sister for writing the book. And then I was on the board of directors of the Vancouver Indian Centre, and he got invited to sit on the board. And the rest is history, little I talk. Being with them now is so much different than we started. And I remember when that first, there was an election for the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and I was telling him, I said, we're in a time of our history where we really deserve good leadership. And so he ran. And back home, they were a little upset at that because he was still the chief. But it's been a blessing. I know he's got to tear back and forth every weekend down to Vancouver and back home on the weekends. And that's fine because we met. It was politics that brought us together, and it's our politics that have kind of solidified the relationship, and it's what keeps us going. And I think of sometimes, small talk is just small talk, but most of our discussions are always political. And we even served on council together and fought together on council together. But really, it's all about, we were taught 4 things by our elders: to love the people, to love the land, to love the culture, which includes language, and love our spirituality. And those are the things that we have to hold up and stand up, and that's what he does. And so I just honor, and I'm so blessed that he bought my sister's book. And now he has to read it. Yeah. And we have 5 children and 15 grandchildren. And I always say, whatever we don't do, they're going to inherit. So we do as much as we can for as long as we can. And for that, I hold him up. Why, Lim, I love you.
Hi, Peace Seal. Well, most people don't realize I'm kind of shy by nature, and I always feel a little embarrassed when these things happen. So any other circumstance, I have a sense of what needs to be said and what needs to be heard. But, this is different. But at any rate, I want to thank the Musqueam people for their generosity, for the honor song. I have the deepest, greatest respect for the Musqueam people. And we did stand together with the Sesnom issue. And against great odds, we were able to salvage that burial site. There was an effort made to build a 5-story condominium on top of that burial site, and we prevailed. And Musqueam people have very strong hearts and are dedicated to protecting the sacredness of our ancestors. So it was a real honor to be down here. And I'd like to thank the Okanagan delegation for the honor song. And I just want to say, as I've always said, I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for Joan. That's our strength, is our relationship and our common sense of purpose and our love for the land and unconditional love for the people. We went through an evolution of bitterness and anger and resentment, and as time moved forward, it evolved into genuine love and respect and kindness. And I guess that's the natural progression of leadership. Myself, I was apprehended, and I carried so much baggage around that issue about deep-rooted anger. But it took me a long time to get on top of that. Treatment was a help. Choices was a great help. And our grandchildren have been afforded the opportunity to enjoy our wellness. They love coming to our house because it's safe, and we don't yell at them or anything like that. It's a no-free zone. So I've loved this organization since I first became aware of it back in the early 70s. And that meeting that George was at, where the funding was rejected, and that debate that raged throughout the day, I was there too, listening. And I've been engaged with the UBCIC from that, for all of the time up until this point. And I'm just so proud of what this organization represents. I'm proud of the, this organization has soul. And you can feel that every time we come together. And we do stand and protect our rights, our inherent rights, and, we defend the land at every opportunity and our people's interests. And it's such an honor to be part of that. It's very humbling. And we have enormous influence because of what this organization represents. So I just want to acknowledge Joan, because, Joan is, the sun rises and sets on her in my life. So, why? Lim lim.
Chiefs and delegates, I'm afraid that's all the time we've had for this. Encouraging you to we'll leave the mics open over lunch and other opportunities over the next couple of days for you to share your words with the Grand Chief as well. But just to point out that at home, at a point like point in time like this, somebody'd always say that this is a celebration for this moment in time, Grand Chief, that there's high expectations that you continue doing the good work that you've been doing for so long, at a minimum for the next 3 years, but well into the future as well. So appreciating that. So we're going to transition immediately into our next agenda item, resuming jurisdiction over children and families, inviting forward Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, Cookby Judy, Regional Chief, Cheryl Casimir, and Jennifer Charlesworth, RCY. Could you come forward to my right, please? And signaling to the presenters for the rest of the day, we're a half hour behind, so we got a little bit of time to make up. We'll cut each presentation by 5 minutes or so, 7 minutes or so, and we'll be on time towards the end of the day. So we'll have just under an hour on this topic. Who would like to start? And just a reminder to everybody that this is being webcast. Mic 4.
Hello. Deneza, Tsekuza, Skyza, Chiefs, Hereditary Chiefs, Delegates. Once again, I just want to acknowledge the Musqueam people and also thanks to the elder for the prayer this morning. Just here to introduce where we're at in terms of the child welfare legislation, in particular the federal legislation, but also the ongoing work that we're doing with the province of British Columbia. I think we have to acknowledge that we're really in an incredible time right now in regards to child welfare. And as British Columbia, I think it should be noted that we're the only region where this legislation can be really enacted. Out of the 10 regions that the Assembly of First Nations represent, and for that matter, the Inuit and Métis, British Columbia can really go forward in terms of our jurisdiction, your respective organizations and community and nation's jurisdiction, and taking over child welfare. And I think that's really important. That and also recognize for far too long, for many decades, that our children were taken away, forcibly taken away. And it was also recognized in a lot of the media where there was a complete disregard for our First Nations caretakers, our parents, who just saw their children taken away. And I think it's also want to acknowledge that many nations in British Columbia are moving ahead in terms of taking over jurisdiction. And that's really important work that you're doing. And you have to continue on to assert your governance and assert the way you believe that your children should be taken care of, whether it's within your community or if those children are outside of your community. And as a part of the 3 organizations of BCFN, First Nation Summit, and UBCIC, the 3 of the 3 amigos, myself, Cheryl Casimir, and Julie Wilson have been really engaging with our technical staff, Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, and our technical staff to work on this file, quite importantly because it's an opportunity where This bill will be enacted on January 1st, but also in taking over jurisdiction with the province of British Columbia, where there is a tripartite working group with the federal government and also the provincial government. And I'll just pass it on to my colleagues to continue on with this presentation. But lastly, I just want to say how important it is to acknowledge that what we stated to Minister Seamus O'Regan, who is Indigenous and Services Canada, who has been the really putting forward this bill to the federal government in the Parliament, and previous to Seamus was Jane Philpott, is that we clearly stated to not only the federal government, but also to the national chief and also to the other regions that we don't want to be waiting behind, that this will be specifically to British Columbia, that we want to move ahead and move forward. We know that out of all the children that have been taken away, nearly a third came out of, nearly a third are British Columbian children. So it's really important that we continue this work, and with your direction, with your guidance, we continue to move forward, and that this will be a BC-specific process to represent your organizations and the way you see moving forward. So I pass it on to my fellow colleagues, Cheryl Casimir and Judy Wilson.
Mic 5.
Good morning, everyone. Want to start off by acknowledging the Musqueam, their territory, for allowing us to do this important work. I also wanted to I know that we're running behind, so my report is going to be very brief, given that it's quite similar to the report that was presented to the BCAFN Assembly last week, and we also have a 2-day all chiefs meeting coming up next week, of which there'll be an opportunity to have more detailed and further discussion on the issues that we're going to touch on here today. Before I start into my report, though, I just wanted to share my congratulations to Grand Chief Stuart Phillip as well for his success in continuing as the president for the UBCIC. And I just wanted to share a quick quote, because to me this is what this captures Stuart's leadership and what it means to me. Men make history and not the other way around. In periods where there is no leadership, society stands still. Progress occurs when courageous, skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better. That was a quote from Harry S. Truman. So congratulations, Stuart. I'm going to quickly touch on issues that are happening federally, as well as what's happening at our tripartite table. As has been mentioned by my colleague, Regional Chief, Regional Chief, he quickly touched on Bill C-92 that received royal assent on June 21st of this year. And then earlier last month, Canada announced that the bill was going to be fully brought into force January 1st, 2020. And so that's why we're having the 2-day session next week to talk a bit more about what that bill means and what it is that we can be doing here on the ground, preparing ourselves to assume that jurisdiction and authority. At the national level through the AFN, they've indicated that they're going to be creating a distinctions-based governance tables to do this work. Although, I mean, we support that to a certain extent, as long as it doesn't affect or impact the work that we're doing here in British Columbia, because we know that we are ahead of some regions because of the fact that we have a partnership with British Columbia, and they're full partners with us and full supporters of the work that we want to do. Other regions are not that lucky. And so that's what makes us different than the rest. And we want to make sure that nothing impedes our ability to continue on with that partnership and to do the work that needs to happen here on the ground. We actually brought a resolution to the AFN AGA to that point, and we received support from the chiefs there that BC will continue to do its work in the way that we see fit, that's going to best meet our needs and our interests here in British Columbia. Also at the AFN level, though, a resolution came to the floor supporting Bill C-92 and also the creation of a AFN Chiefs Political and Technical Committee to help them do some work. At the BC AFN meeting, there were appointments that were made. For the Chiefs Political Committee, Chief Wayne Christian was appointed, and for the Chiefs Technical Committee, Bill Yoakum was appointed. So those are the two reps for British Columbia, just as an FYI. One of the other recent victories that we have been dealing with is the ruling from the CHRT that came down on September 6th. And that ruling found that Canada had willfully and recklessly discriminated against First Nations children and families. And so those that have been discriminated against are entitled up to compensation of up to $40,000 for the discrimination and subsequent harm caused. You can find more information on the Caring Society's website, and I'm not sure if we have any information. We do. Okay. Where can they get it? On our website, on UBCIC. UBCIC also has that information on their website as well. I'm quickly going to go over to the technical tripartite working group that we have. Just a couple of quick things. We're continuing to work on our work plan and our budget to help us carry through on the work that we've identified. We've got some priority areas that we'll be focusing on: fiscal relations and funding, resumption of jurisdiction, and practical implications for First Nations in British Columbia. This is to ensure that there's alignment between the federal and provincial legislation, and that child and family services are adequately funded and resourced based on the principles of substantive equality, that there is the funding necessary for First Nations to come to the table and to draw down on this legislation, and that jurisdiction discussions are First Nations directed and led. And to support this work, we've struck some technical working groups under the umbrella of the TWG. A call out has been sent out to all First Nations in British Columbia, and I hope that you've had an opportunity to look at it, because the deadline for those call-outs is coming up fairly quickly, as October 15th is the deadline. We're looking for representatives to join our practice subcommittee and our fiscal relations subcommittee. And I believe that that email was sent out on September 19th, sent out through the BC AFN. So hoping that you have some people who have that expertise with that background from the nation level who can come and join us on these technical working groups. As I mentioned, we do have the two-day session coming up on October 9th and 10th at the Sheraton Wall Center. I'm hoping that people are registering for that. There will be a full discussion on Bill C-92 and what it means, and what the implications are to BC First Nations. We want to be able to create a strong understanding of what the legislation means and how nations can draw down on it. We have several nations already who are beginning that work on jurisdiction, and they'll be presenting on what it is that they're doing, what's working, what are some of the challenges. And we're hoping by the end of the 2 days that we'll be able to walk away with a clearer understanding of what is possible with this legislation, so that all children and families from First Nations in BC are able to benefit. Prior to the All Chiefs on October 9th and 10th, the Child and Family Leads, RC, myself, and Chief Judy Wilson have also been invited to participate in the 2-day session that's taken place in Splatseen. I believe that Chief Wayne Christian and his team have been putting together this session to bring together those nations that are working on jurisdiction right now, to also be able to have fulsome discussion, sharing ideas about what works, what isn't, and what the challenges are, and coming up with possibly some recommendations to feed into the two-day session on the 9th and 10th. So I'm looking forward to the Indigenous jurisdiction gathering as well. And I think that's it for me. I'm trying to be really quick because I understand we're a half hour behind.
Cooksham, I'll also be brief, and thank you again for the songs and the prayers this morning, and our ancestral people of Musqueam and the modern day descendants and the leadership. I just wanted to just pick up on one point on the federal one is, and Mary Ellen will speak to it, I hope, is the coordination agreements. We still don't know what the wording and the language in those agreements will be and how you access them. And then the funding, of course, which the federal government, as you know, is in the election mode. So they're saying not till October, but whatever respective government comes in, we need to know that piece. So I'll just quickly go on to the provincial landscape. So there was a bilateral protocol signed with Minister Conroy, the Ministry of Children, Family and Development. And under that protocol, the minister has agreed for regular meetings with the Leadership Council to discuss matters relating, and that's within the scope and within the accordance to the resolutions the chiefs have given us. So we have to continue on with that communications. As you heard, there's immediate cease on the practice of birth alerts, but we're still finding the policies and the practice have to change on the ground, so that we're still continuing to deal with that. The practice of flagging of expectant parents, mothers, that has to change. And we're still dealing with the issues with baby H, of course. Many might have heard of that in the news. So the stopping birth alert policy, is important, but the issues are continuing, and we need to ensure that it's not just Ministry of Child and Family. There needs to be a cross-ministerial approach to it. So that's what we're pushing the province and the agencies to, so that we can end that practice that tears the families apart. And then the tribunal decisions should also make people question when they're making those decisions on apprehension like that, because of the woeful and reckless regard for breaking up families. The other thing, and I'll leave a lot of that to the RCY, but we're working on renewed relationship, which we did already, so that the MOU is associated with the resolution. It's in your package to review. It's an important work that the RCY does, so we need to have regular meetings, we need to have regular communications. And the other point is still with 50% of children still being in care that are Indigenous, it's important that we have that data and the RCY has it, and that we understand those issues, and we can have those advocates working with us and for us and reporting to our governments to support the work that's happening in around Indigenous children and family. So the other important aspect I just want to touch on too is the UN Declaration. There's components in Bill C-92, so we have to be careful how we're building on that in the UN Declaration and the provincial legislation. So, because there's already some entrenched in the Bill C-92, so we have to work how that's going to work with the province and then the proposed UN declaration. So I just want to encourage the chiefs, if you haven't signed the undertaking, please sign it so you can look at the UN declaration legislation and keep in mind how does that work with children and family, how does that work with languages, how does that work with the other legislation that's has passed, and some of the ones that are being proposed, and some of the legislation that we're dealing with currently. So thank you, and I'll leave a lot of the other stuff to Mary Ellen and RCY here. Okay, thank you.
Just before continuing, just a clarification for chiefs, delegates, and the panel. I did state we're a half hour behind, but I'm not expecting any one agenda item to make up that half hour. I did ask each presentation to be reduced by 5 to 7 minutes, And this is one of the bigger ticket items of discussion today, so we'll take the time necessary to have the discussion. So don't feel too rushed, panel, but do get your messages across so we can engage chiefs with questions and comments. Mic 5?
Mary Ellen's here, so she picked all those. I don't know who wants to go.
Mic 4?
Yeah. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I too would like to thank Musqueam Nation and Musqueam people for their hospitality and acknowledge their territory. So I'm Mary Ellen Turpelafond. Akikwe is my Nehio name, but everybody calls me Metal. So you can call me Metal or Heavy Metal if it's a bad day. Today's a good day, so don't have to call me Heavy Metal. I'm just going to ask that they pop up on the screen a sheet that I want to go through. Just to follow up on the briefing that you've received from Leadership Council, we're going to circulate just a one-page document for you today, and I want to walk through it in terms of the technical briefing. We have, as you know, some really significant gatherings on children and families next week, gathering of those who are working on their own laws or have already got their laws in place. That's the jurisdiction meeting with the Shuswap Nation Tribal Council. I'm very excited to be going to that and to be supporting that, because obviously you'll see the first point on this kind of blue PowerPoint. People have been ready for a long time, and this isn't a new area, but the world is going to change on January 1. So what I've prepared for you today is just a one-pager on what will be different. We're 60 days away from January 1 when Bill C-92 comes into place. And as you know from previous presentations and work over the last 18 months, First Nations of BC and UBCIC pushed hard for what ended up in Bill C-92. And many of you around the table presented to the House of Commons and the Senate, and Bill C-92 was improved. It was a very major fight to get it to reflect what we wanted. And it's of course not perfect. Like all legislation, it can still be changed. There's a few areas without question we're going to be pushing very hard on and keep going. But testament, I haven't got time to name people, but there are people around the table who went to Ottawa after the bill was released and had it improved to include things like custom adoption and other areas where we felt there were still gaps. So what I want to talk about, though, is I know not everyone here is going to make those children and family meetings next week. So what we're leaving you with is a one-pager that they're going to hand out, which is what you see on the screen. So what happens on January 1? What is different for you, your community, your children and families on January 1? Getting ready for that day. Because despite what everyone says, it's going to be an element of chaos with change. Because obviously child welfare system has been in a mess for a long time. And despite a lot of talking and a lot of reports and attention, things haven't actually changed very much. And as of January 1, the world will be a different place. But it will really only be a different place if you carry it, pick it up, and keep going, and use some of the tools that are going to be available for you on January 1 that weren't there already. I've already had a couple of cases where I've appeared in a court or been called in, cases that are scheduled for February 15th for a 3-day trial in a court around a number of siblings, First Nations kids, where we just resolved the entire case. Because with C-92 coming, they're saying family unity, family preservation is so important that they're going to change the position that the Ministry of Children and Families has. But again, that's only because we're pushing and pushing and pushing. And for once, we're going to have in place a federal law that affirms inherent rights, affirms a whole set of tools that will apply in British Columbia. So today I can't go through it all. Our meetings on children and families are going to address that next week, both at the First Nations lawmaking side, also at the Children and Families Gathering. You're going to see there's also a national gathering that's coming in November in Winnipeg. That's organized by the First Nations Advocate of Manitoba, where a lot of information is going to come out. At the AFN level, as Regional Chief said, the national there's a Chiefs Committee getting going, but there is no clear relationship on how to do implementation because there's an election. A lot of people are trying to slow it down, but thank goodness, just before the writs were dropped, there was an order in council that the entire act comes into force on January 1. So I'll just walk through this briefly. Of course, we're available for questions. We're available for support. First Nations leadership team is pushing and pushing, and we're going to be, needing to do a lot more briefing very soon because, we do have 5,000 cases here in British Columbia, not to mention, hundreds of other situations where you're going to need support, and we are going to have to get that support out there. So the law that's coming into place isn't creating anything new, it's affirming inherent rights. That's really important because one of the fights we had with them about implementation, they were like, well, we want to delay implementation so the provinces can be more comfortable. And we were very clear saying, you can't delay it because it's inherent rights already. You're only affirming, what are you delaying it for? We are just going to finally get recognized, and First Nations laws will have full force and effect in every forum. So we were able to push through that. I say that because if you get any pushback by people saying, oh, the law is changing, it's going to take time, these are new concepts, please remind them these are inherent rights. Chiefs speak for their families, heads of families speak for their children. Traditional customary systems of dealing with children are positively affirmed and recognized. It didn't start on January 1. So I just want to make sure that we push back because I'm already fighting that. And some of the material that Canada is putting out for information, we are sending them notes back to say, stop, talking like you created a new world on January 1. This is, Chief Wayne Christian can tell you in 1980, the bylaw was passed at Splatson, and there's hundreds of other examples of work that's been done. So the second line there about what more needs to be done, you'll see the dollar sign. I just want to say that the legislation has two key provisions on funding. The government was not really clear about what they would do on funding. We are pushing hard. We have never accepted no for an answer on funding, and we are going to fight like crazy on funding. And in my respectful view, my legal view as a very skilled lawyer, former judge, professor of law, is that we have a foundation in this legislation for funding. And I'm just going to read out the funding provision because I want to make sure it's in your mind and you start repeating it in your meetings. And that is, the Government of Canada acknowledges the ongoing call for funding that is predictable, stable, sustainable, needs-based, and consistent with the principle of substantive equality in order to secure long-term positive outcomes for children, families, and communities. That's a broad concept. They haven't attached an envelope of money to it, but they're not going to have any choice but to do it. So definitely push hard at your tables on that. You are also going to have some pushback. There are some naysayers I've been hearing already saying, oh, First Nations can't go forward with child welfare because what about liability? We are doing an opinion. I'm preparing opinion right now for a Union of BC Indian Chiefs, which I believe we'll be sharing through the Leadership Council on the issue of liability. You're going to have to get insurance like everybody. Everybody gets liability insurance. It's normal. It happens. We're going to need special insurance policies. Non-Indigenous foster parents get insurance through the Ministry of Children and Families. Delegated agencies have insurance. It's not a barrier liability. So we'll be getting you something on that soon because you might have some fear mongering around that, and we certainly don't want you to think it's a barrier because it's not. So we're going to keep pushing on the funding, liability, and a few others so that some of those barriers come down. Now, the third bullet with the question mark is, what if you have cases? You have families in the system now, what do you do? So there's 3 points that we're making today and that we would like to encourage you to consider. Take every opportunity to continue to advocate for your children and families under your authority as chiefs. Make sure you know that your families and caregivers have new rights, because families, parents, grandparents, kinship relations have rights under this legislation that have never been in existence before, including a right to be informed and notified, not just you get the facts to the band office, there's a proceeding, to be meaningfully notified and informed every time any kind of decision is made, and to participate, including having status as a party in a court proceeding if you want it, or the right to make representations. So it's important that you have a copy of Bill C-92. If you have a case anywhere, you go there, you bring that bill and you say, I have a right to be heard, you are going to listen to me. Do not back down. And if you have any difficulty, you make sure you get in touch with us because we will back you up for that. So this is about massive change. So if they say, sorry, we can't hear from you, it's not consistent with the provincial child welfare legislation, you say, no, here it is. I have a right to be heard. I'm the grandparent, I'm the aunt, I'm the chief, I'm the counselor, I'm the matriarch, whatever. The next point is, so that point 3, you can have standing as a party. So who has standing now as a party? Grandparents, parents, chief, so forth. So you have automatic standing, which means if there's a court case going on, you go in and you say, I'm here to have full standing in this case. Now, we are going to have to push to make sure you get representation if you need it, because, you know, in BC, we don't have a full set of resources in place first day, but you don't need those resources. You know what to say, and you need to make sure you're treated with respect. If you're not treated with respect, please contact us. Let us know, because we will make complaints if judges don't treat you with respect, if lawyers don't treat you with respect, if social workers don't treat you with respect. If you and your matriarchs and families are not given utmost respect, we will address that issue, okay? So we're gonna deal with the systemic racism, and the world is a changed place. In terms of the 4th bullet point, where you see the family with the heart, one of the important things in Bill C-92 that I want to put out for you is you have a right to ask for a reassessment of any case. Reassessment of the placement of a child. You may have a child that's put into permanent, long-term care, severed all rights with the birth family under the provincial law. You have a right to ask for it to be reassessed. I know those are hard cases, right? There have been some bad cases. I'm well aware of them, where cases where even in my time I fought hard and lost, and it's been really a bitter pill to swallow because it was wrongly decided. We have a right to get those reopened. So if you have a case that you want reconsidered, bring it forward. So at the bottom, bring it to your delegated agency if you have one. Bring it to the social worker, bring it to an advocate, bring it to a lawyer, bring it to the courts, bring it to us, okay? So we want to make sure that there's a reassessment. And that open ability to do that is very significant. Now, the next one, you'll see that sort of loudspeaker on the left-hand side. So again, this is that your right to be informed, and some of the section numbers have been put down here just for you, and so you will get, as I say, this material. It's just the beginning, carried around with you, we'll give you more. You have that right to be informed. So we want to work out an arrangement, for instance, with the Ministry of Children and Families. We've had some discussions, as the chiefs here have said. We have a table with them where we've said, what are you going to do on day 1? And then we're actually not asking their permission, but we're telling them we expect them to change how they not just notify, but inform parents and community about what happens with kids. Because kids tend to go into foster care, go down the rabbit hole, and that's it. And then you're told confidentiality, stay away. So we're pushing back very hard on that. So the final one is, again, that standing as a party. I just flag that because sometimes when a new system comes into place, as you know, like, people are so entrenched in the old system and the old way of doing things. Like, they're going, like, you know, Ministry of Children and Families has 4,000 employees, right? They're not going to know this. They haven't been trained on it, right? They're still training them on the old system. So on day 1, they're not going to know it. And again, it's going to be on your shoulders as First Nations leaders to really go there and remind them. So we're going to have a bit of a transition. So don't hesitate to do that. And if you have to take Bill C-92, a copy itself, take it. We'll give you more fact sheets. We have a bunch more fact sheets for you, and we're going to unveil some of those at the Children and Family Gathering, but we have a lot of work to be done. But it's very important and it's very exciting work, but without a doubt, those concepts in Bill C-92, the right of a child to be raised in their family, their community, their territory, with their culture and language, the right of the child to be placed in the family, in their own First Nations family, not any Aboriginal melting pot family, their First Nation. You don't place Haida children in Salish families unless they want that. You know, this is really important. So getting rights and title holders and the proper system in place to recognize children and where they belong and how decisions are made with their families and governments is a big shift, right? It's a big shift for some of the existing child welfare agencies. So we without a doubt, I would say to you that by the time we're here next year, there's going to be someone who's passed a law and is exercising their own jurisdiction. Kupti Wilson said, you know, how is this going to work? I just want to finish, it's not on this sheet, it's another sheet, but I want to finish by saying, some of you have agreements already, bilateral, trilateral agreements, your jurisdiction tables, and your treaty process, child and families, one of the items, and that's fantastic. You do not need to get a mandate on your inherent rights to pass law over children and families. The Bill C-92 was drafted to give you a full and complete mandate, and they don't have to go back and get any more mandate. It's just a matter of coordinating. What the new bill says in section 18 is that you can pass your laws. You can request a coordinating agreement. So if you want to just pass your law, you don't want to deal with the feds and the provinces, that's your choice, you can do that. That's based on your inherent rights. The federal provincial government might say, well, we may not recognize that law. Well, I think they have no choice, they have to recognize it. The issue is what happens when there's a conflict between what's in your law and the CF and CSA and BC. You know, so you can do this. You can say, look, we're starting the process to pass our own law, and don't get too worried about what passing a law means. There are really serious work everywhere in terms of protecting and revitalizing traditional laws and customs. That's important. The first law can just be, we're going to decide this according to our First Nations customs and traditions, end of story. It only has to be 2 paragraphs long. It doesn't have to be a big thing, right? You just need to protect your inherent practices and rights. You can request, you can say, we're doing that process, we want a coordinating agreement, which means the feds and the provinces have to come to the table. They have 12 months. If they don't have a coordinating agreement after 12 months, your law is paramount to their law. That's how it overrides the provincial and federal law. In the US, we call that, under the US tribal sovereignty system, where we kind of borrowed some of these concepts from because we're hard to argue, that's called full force and effect. We want your law to have full force and effect and be the law that applies to your families no matter where they are. There's no on reserve, off reserve in this law. It's about people. So that's another thing. Someone's going to say, oh, your laws only apply on reserve. Say, that is nonsense. Forget it. This person named Mary Ellen told me you're crazy and we're going to fight you over that. Because we're not accepting that. So the laws apply to your people. It's jurisdiction over the person no matter where they are. So even if you have some kids in Edmonton or whatever, or you got some kids from the Cree Nation, my band here in Vancouver, we got to realign how this work is done. Okay, so priority on placement and the jurisdiction piece is there. There is nothing to stop you from passing your own law on the day one. It can be however you wish to do it, and you can do it over time in different ways, and you can change it. But I know that the Kupti Christian and others on Leadership Council will say, occupy the field, occupy the field, occupy the field, which is just a kind of legal way of saying they've sort of viewed it as the province has full power, which was a mistake, right? We know that wasn't consistent with everything going right back to the Royal Proclamation and inherent rights and everything. So now occupy the field, at least send a notice to them saying we're working on our law, get your process started. And we are going to be doing a lot of working around. But the most important thing I would just say to you is for all of the cases that you have, absolutely step up. I know you're very busy. I know there's hundreds of things that come across the community, and leadership has lots and lots of issues. But this is one where if you flex now, it will be so much easier, right? It'd be so much easier to get things good out of the start. It's like the first day of school. Like you can put that best foot forward on the first day, by December. I think of my 15-year-old. He's got his act together on the first day. By about the end of September, he's fallen apart. But we gotta push really hard to come out of the starting gate strong. There is no region stronger than British Columbia. I'm working in Saskatchewan, where 90% of the kids in care are First Nations. Manitoba, elsewhere, but there's no stronger region than here because of the strength of First Nations laws and traditions and practices, and because of the history of advocacy and pushback on the system. But we have also had to go to court to win a lot of cases. I mean, we've had removals at birth. We're still in courts on cases of removals at birth and birth alerts. Yes, the birth alert has been removed. That was wonderful on September the 19th that the province did that, and credit First Nations Leadership Council pushing them hard to do that. But we're still going to have cases where hospitals do removals, right? So you gotta reach out for help and step up. But if the only thing you can do because you're swamped on January 1 is take this blue sheet, right, a version we give you and the act, and just put it in front of people and say, you need to listen to us. You need to hear from us. Family unity, family preservation, passing our culture and language to our children is the imperative, right? And we need to find a solution. The final thing I'm going to say, which is going to be really interesting but really important, is one of the most powerful tools in this legislation is the provision that says children cannot be removed due to poverty, lack of housing, or a health issue from a caregiver. As you know, a lot of grandparents raising grandchildren get sick, children are removed. They're not to remove the child for that. And that's that sort of neglect category. But as you know, you're sitting in a situation where, do you have the housing? No, you don't. You know, what are you going to do, right? From a leadership viewpoint, we know that you're going to have challenges from a leadership viewpoint because they're going to try and push it all down on you to fill that gap, right? So again, when it comes to supporting families and dealing with housing issues, dealing with lack of support for families, we're going to have to really push back hard. So those provisions as well, you've got to back you up. You can't remove the child because of bad housing. So what's going to happen? If the community doesn't have the housing, then we got to get more housing. We got to get an emergency situation. We have to have that in place. We can't consent to continuing to do it. So these are I call them tools. You have the right to pass your laws, of course. This is a clear pathway for it. But on January 1, it's a whole new set of tools, right? So it's going to be a really great New Year's. I'm very excited about it personally. But I don't anticipate that I'll be getting a lot of sleep, because in order for us to do this work, we really need to pull together, and we need to be very supportive of each other and really come and those who are breaking trail need to really support the others, because I guarantee you there'll be cases everywhere. And we'll get some good decisions and we will get change, but it's like sort of the new day finally has dawned, but we've got to use those tools. So we'll get you more information. We know you have a very busy agenda here. The work is intense. Be prepared for a level of chaos. I can just tell you that anytime there's change of this magnitude, no one is in planning for it. The more we let rights and title holders drive it, the more we bring it to British Columbia to have our Made in British Columbia approach, the better and more likely it will be. Because there could be another region, if we are stuck with another part of Canada, it could be another part they're like not even, they don't have as many children, they, you know, whatever. They're still wonderful people, we'll work with them. But they're just not like, you know, we're like at the starting gate where we've been held back. So British Columbia is like within 6 months, like within a year, you know, it would be great if we had maybe 10 First Nations laws operating, maybe more. I mean, maybe we'll have 50, I don't know. I certainly think that we should take full advantage of it. And you heard from the Justice Council yesterday, for those of you who are here at the First Nations Justice Council. I know we're working with them as well, because we do have the ability to set up our own courts, tribal courts, to decide our cases if it gets that we have to do that and we need to do that, or do our own mediation. We're also exploring those issues. So Justice Council will say more about that. I'm going to just stop there. I know we're out of time, but you're going to get the sheet. If you have questions, I'll be here today and tomorrow, because I'll be back. The UNDRIP legislation that we're going to talk about tomorrow, that UNDRIP legislation in BC also helps affirm many of the things we're talking about here. They really like swim together. Like it's really, it will mean it will be a really possibly very beautiful situation in British Columbia where, you know, it's not so hard to fight these issues. We can turn the corner. So I'm able to do that. I can answer questions today if we have time, but I will be here as well if you need anything. I will be at both of those gatherings. We will get information out. If your technical people need technical briefings, we can provide support to them. And we can share opinions with them on liability and so forth as they come out. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll go to the RCY before opening up to questions and comments. Mic 5.
Right, thank you very much. My name is Jennifer Charlesworth. I'm the representative for Children and Youth of British Columbia and celebrated my first anniversary in that role yesterday. So first of all, as a way of beginning and centering myself, I want to acknowledge with gratitude being able to gather on the lands of the Musqueam peoples. I'm also feeling very honored to have seen the honoring of you, Grand Chief. And I want you to know that there have been words that you have shared with me over the years that I have taken to heart in my own practice, and that's influenced how I show up as a representative. So my gratitude to you. Gratitude for the prayers, for the elders speaking. So I will move quite quickly. I was going to introduce myself a little bit and where I come from, but I think I'm going to slide over that, and perhaps I'll have an opportunity when we gather next week to talk about children and youth. But there is the first and most important thing I want to say is that as the representative for children and youth, we fully support the direction that is being taken place with resumption of jurisdiction over child, youth, and family matters and the well-being of your children and youth. So that's the most important place to start. So my office is an independent office. We are not accountable to a ministry, but we are accountable and report to the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia, and I report to a select standing committee on children and youth. And we have 3 main roles. The first is advocacy, and I'm going to come back to that in a few moments. The second is investigations. You may know us best by the investigations, the reports that have been done, particularly on very disturbing cases and all too often pertaining to Indigenous children and youth. And the third area is monitoring and research. So let me unpack each of those very briefly. The advocacy, I feel, is the one that's most important in this circle right now, because what we do, my staff, there are advocates that are highly trained, significant number of Indigenous staff. In fact, 20% of our staff are Indigenous. And they walk alongside children, youth, young adults, and their families in order to ensure that their rights are upheld. So anyone can contact us if they feel that a child's rights to their family, to cultural connection, to the services and supports that they need, to being listened to, is not being upheld. And there are many ways that we can walk alongside. Sometimes we might coach and assist in terms of self-advocacy, and other times we will be in there, and sometimes for many, many years. And in fact, over this last weekend, a young person that we have been involved in his life for many years, about 11 years, I think, since Mary Ellen's time. We were very actively advocating over the weekend to ensure that he was well cared for in a very difficult circumstance. So advocacy is very important, and we can assist and support you as you're going forward in these times. The other thing is, I'll skip over the investigations, you may be more familiar with that, but the other thing that I want to talk about is monitoring and research. So what we have done is we have created a different structure in the office in this last year. We have a designated deputy that's responsible for advocacy, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit relations. And we are recruiting for that position. We'll be recruiting very shortly for that position, and I have invited First Nations Leadership Council to participate in that selection process. We need to find someone who can be really attentive to the changing landscape. We've also created 2 teams under Indigenous Strategies and Partnerships, and one of them is monitoring and research. There are stacks of reports in my office that speak to what needs to be done. There's the legislation, there's Grand Chief Ed John's report. So that team is responsible for ensuring and monitoring government's reflection and action on those reports and those recommendations. That includes Missing and Murdered, TRC, and of course the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. So that allows us to exercise our influence. We also are working on the joint commitment that Chief Wilson spoke about, and that will lead us into other ways in which we can be in service in this time. We have a tremendous amount of data. We have things that we think will be helpful to you. I call it stories by numbers. So the numbers and the information that we have tell a story about some of the patterns, the trends, the things that we're worried about. And I can tell you, every day I see and read files that scare me, that worry me, and that we must do better. So sometimes those stories and the data and the patterns and the trends could be very useful to you. And our commitment is to make that much more accessible. The other thing is that we see amazing practice. We see bright spots. We see things that communities are proud of, and we are sharing more of that now. The other thing is we can be influential. We can, of course, monitor the government's response, and most importantly, the allocation of resources and funding. We can shine a light on the things that need to be done, and we can support in public education. I'm also involved in the Canadian Council on Child and Youth Advocates, and that council has stepped up to, again, work alongside and take direction from First Nations leaders across this country as we move forward in exercising the best that we can do in support of this movement forward. So I'm going to stop there and say that there's more to come next week when we meet. But I want to affirm that we are absolutely supportive, want to walk alongside or take your direction and follow. We have things that we think will be helpful. And in the meantime, if there are ways that we can be supportive in terms of the advocacy work that you're doing, please contact us and we will do our very best to assist in this transition period. So thank you.
Thank you. Opening up to questions and comments, starting at mic 7. Sorry, Chief Harris.
Chief Don Harris from Douglas First Nation. Some of you may recall that I've been at this table for years fighting over a certain case. It took me 9 years to get some children home on a case that was never investigated, never followed up on. Yeah. And the children were removed right from the community, destroyed the family and everything. We do have them home, but what we've done since, we've created a department to address the child and family more so on the prevention side. But we still have a number of issues surrounding that. The first one is that you may also recall that I've been fighting to try and get protocols with the designated agencies. We've gone through, the agency we've been trying to deal with has gone through several presidents already. All promised to sit down with us, never have. One of the things they have done, they've increased the day's notice to a few days' notice when there's action being taken, still by fax. But these are some of the issues that we really need to address, is that we need to be able to, we talk about control of our children wherever they are, but we don't have that working relationship with the designated agencies, and they refuse to sit down with us and develop the protocols just so we can have, like we want to know when there's an issue with one of our children so we can address it before it becomes action. And most recently, we did have an incident where it was a band member in another community, living in another community at the time, had an issue with MCFD, or an incident with MCFD, that there was an apprehension. So our department, we reached out to try and work with the family, see what we can do to help the family. And I think MCFD was testing the jurisdiction and authorities, is that they directed our staff to monitor 24 hours a day in a hospital in Vancouver. They were our band members, but the incident was not in our communities. And it happened to be a weekend, so we had 2 staff members that spent 24 hours a day, taking turns 24 hours a day through the weekend, monitoring for MCFD on one of their cases. So this is another area that we have to look at, is that how do you address those jurisdictions when MCFD cases, and like our staff, because of the weekend, didn't have the opportunity to try and contact somebody to find out why, how, or what to do. They sat down there all weekend. So that was, but the big thing is that a lot of talk I've been hearing is with MCFD and the governments here, we need the protocols between ourselves, our First Nations child agencies. So that is a big thing big hurdle we need to overcome as well, so that we can work with our community members. We have the right to our community members, but we don't have the ability to deal with the designated agencies at this time to gain that knowledge or information of when there are incidents happening. So thank you.
Thank you to the panel. We've got a number of speakers. We're going to hear from them before coming back to you. I've got 17, 7, 14, 6, and 21. Mike 17.
Why squeezed in Kilochin? Thank you to the ancestral lands where we're at, and I guess I have a couple of comments in terms of the presentation. The Made in BC motto. If you look back at the time when Canada confederated, BC was not part of the initial country of Canada. In the terms of union, it clearly expresses the relationship in BC being unique as to unceded territory. And that includes not only the intertribal relationships, but that also includes our rights to govern. And I think I just want to express that at the outset, that it is very unique in BC, and it's not like in other parts of the country where at the time of Confederation that a number of treaties were already executed at that point. So I have to clearly express that this continues to be unceded territory. And I think that in a collective approach from the union's perspective, that needs to be maintained and protected in terms of the community's engagement and their ability to be fully informed in moving forward. So I just want to make that note that BC does require a different set of circumstances entirely.
Lieutenant Chief, Mike 7.
Gundanuk, Travis Hall, Health Tribal Council proxy. One thing I just wanted to state was that in the assessment of all these cases, sadly, the law enforcement officers and their practice is very discriminatory against their people, especially when poverty has an issue to do with it. And their assessment is that, you know, sadly their home is unfit, but it's not due to anything we have control over. We've initiated in our community that the RCMP go through a cultural sensitivity course that's put on by our people. Sadly, that's in none of their training when they go to become a law enforcement officer. So I just wanted to state that because it is very detrimental to those families in those cases. Well, gracias.
Thank you. Mike 14.
Tatwa Alap, Colleen Jacob, and Shkochicha, Krakulab Mukhan, Stratlium. I just wanted to say a little bit of comments, and I do thank the Musqueam for their lending us their land to have this meeting here. I have a couple of nephews that were in care in Vancouver. They were taken away, and it was my mom who was very persistent. You know, she had to travel to Vancouver 4 hours just to come to all the courts, and she really made it a point to come to the courts every time they had something, and the ministry wanted to go CCO. And we had no idea what any of this meant. We had to struggle through this whole system to learn what was happening. And so we ended up going to court, and we did bring our nephews back. I have one nephew, and my mom has another. And to me, I really feel like, you know, that was the right thing to do. to bring them home, because I think if they were raised differently, they would not know who they are, and they are growing up in their own lands, their own culture, and I'm really thankful for that. And, you know, I'm also thankful for this direction that we're going. And I don't know how it's going to unfold. I know that we're going to be looking at the details. And if there are, you know, we'll go along, we'll learn about it. And if there are improvements that we need to make, then those are the improvements that we will, you know, reach when we get there. But I'm a really strong believer that, you know, that this is something that we needed to do. We need to do it in our own way, using our own customs. And again, that we are capable of doing it. And because I think, you know, our people always had a problem with authority. You know, I guess I speak from my own experience, or even what I've witnessed in our people, that we do not want to have to deal with, you know, so-called authorities, but, you know, just to have us do it our own way. So again, I am thankful for, you know, this direction that we're going, and so thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Mike 6.
Yeah, Terry Walkus, Kwaslanakta, proxy. Everything I've heard this morning is great, but there's still stuff that are very frustrating with the system. I was part of a meeting a while back where I believe there was 5 children who got adopted out, and this family said, we will give you access to your children anytime. And now this day they say you can't see your kids anymore. So this adoption process needs to be looked at again. And this mother who gave up her kids had no support whatsoever. If she came and asked at the time, like you guys probably heard me so many times at this table, it's so frustrating with everything. I don't appreciate what happens in personally with families who are charged in regards to sexual assault. But this is stuff that's happened a while back. I try to ask ministry, what can these grandparents do to make it right? Because I was in a meeting about 2 weeks ago where the grandfather and grandmother can't even see their kids. Said straight out in the Port Hardy office, no, they will never see their grandchildren. How can you say that? Everybody has a past. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody tries to make them right. Like I said, I'm not supporting what they did, but they miss their grandchildren. I don't look into their past as to where this happened or when it happened, whether it's 5, 10 years, but we need to look at that. And also there needs to be an open area for other parents who say are in Vancouver here. I've received calls from people who say, I heard you help a lot of your members with children in care. Can you help me? And I don't like to step on anybody's toes in any nation. I got respect for all nations. And I ask, I say, well, can you get your chief or any of your leadership to contact me before I say anything? I will not step on anybody's toes. I got respect and for them, as I was taught. You know, I imagine I'll be seeing you soon, because I've reached out to Bill Yoakum because of everything that's been going on in our nation. We had one judge who was good to us in Port Hardy, but that's only her. She always let the leadership speak, and she helped us get 2 of our kids back in Campbell River because she sat on the board. I mean, at the table and said, "Yeah, I've never seen 9 leadership come into a courthouse supporting their members, so the father received his kids back, and it was this judge has been good to us. The other ones won't give us the time of day, so I appreciate that. But I would just, like to see some changes in regards to the adoption, because his mother is crying. She can't see her kids anymore. I brought a case where my cousin hung himself fighting ministry, and then 10 years later, his wife died with his kids in care. So they spent a good 20 years fighting the system. What did they do? Everything you said was, what I wanted to hear. I wish it was tomorrow, but, it's, I'd like to know who I talked to, like, when you say the October 15th deadline, we need to know and be on the same page, because it's been us as leadership. I have 2 more back there that share the same goals as I do with children in care. I got nothing against our Health and Family Services office, but they don't support our children in care quite like us. So I'd just like to know, like, anything, any deadlines or anything that we can pass on to whoever is going to be applying for this funding. And like I said, this can't come any sooner, and I appreciate everything that's been done at the front. But like I said, I'd like to know what we can do for that family with the parents who died fighting the system, and they still got kids in there in the system. Because I go to that office still today, and they still have that same BS attitude. The continuing custody order, they keep pushing that on our people. The mother, a new mother, still, it's not even about drinking or drugs anymore. It's about what they want. They want, like you said, new homes and bigger homes and food, and we have all that covered. But they have their own way of saying, no, it's not good enough. But we need to look at grandparents or anybody, even if they're handicapped. They're the ones that are doing all the work, but they're not being recognized. And that office in Port Hardy won't even look at anybody who can, like, who barely walk. But that's what's keeping that person alive, because they drive them. I've seen them drive them to Kamloops and Nanaimo, Vancouver, with their own money. But ministry just says, no, you're handicapped. You're not good enough for your grandchildren, and it's wrong. That needs to change. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got 4 more speakers, and I'm cutting the line there. There was mentioned in the presentation there's a special session coming up on this in the near future. Mike 21.
Good morning. My name is Melinda Swan. I'm proxy for a House It. Where I come from, we have a program called USMA. It's parallel to MCFD. And our community has gotten funding through that program to have family support workers who represent the families in our community. So my question is, are they going to be, how are they going to be notified of the change? And there's information here for the chiefs and for next week for the chiefs, but what about the behind the scenes workers? What's the plan for that? And is there going to be any formal notification beforehand to all the chiefs to share with our staff back home from the panel or from UBCIC? And in other situations, we have a call-in helpline. I heard the lady mention that we need to be prepared for a level of chaos. I just am trying to figure out how do we help those people that don't have the services in their community. And years ago, our hereditary chiefs made a stand and said no more children would be taken away from our community, and we worked together with this USMA and developed protocol agreements and did the hard work. So I applaud, I raise my hands up to the panel for all the work that they've done. Thank you.
Tlaco, Mike 9.
Chief Stuart Alec for NASCO. My question would be some clarity around the ongoing funding for the 84 nations that are not part of an agri group or an agency. Do we have to negotiate our long-term funding at our own tables, such as G2G tables? That was my question.
Thank you. Mike 11. Sorry, Mike 12.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Tom. I'm Deputy Chief and Proxy of Witsett First Nation. I wear many hats, as most of us do around the table, and I'm Wet'suwet'en from Witsett. Our nation has been working really hard over a many number of years on developing our own laws and our constitution. And I think in a lot of ways we're ahead of the game in that regard. We have our ANABIP program that has been doing a lot of great work. That program is proposal driven right now. And one of the other hats that I wear in my day job is I'm Assistant Director at Gitxsan Child and Family Services, one of the 24 delegated Aboriginal agencies. And through my work, we are funded through a population and child count formula. My question to the panel is, are there resources for those that are non-affiliated with a delegated Aboriginal agency? Because that's the hum on the street right now, is that this new legislation doesn't come with resources and it doesn't come with funding. So I just wanted to ask that here and seek some clarification so that when I'm asked this type of question at home, I could provide them with some answers or at least redirect them to those that may have those answers. So are there resources coming with this new legislation? Awitsa.
Thank you. Mike 21.
Hello, I'm Stephen Press-Backmo, proxy for Get One Gag. I was adopted myself, so this kind of strikes close to home. Me and my sister were taken with our mother, who was put into foster care, told that we'd be taken care of through that family. My sister was abused, raped by my mom's foster brother. So they thought it would be safer that we be taken from my mom and put into foster care ourselves. I got lucky, my sister didn't. She went through more abuse. We were finally adopted. Great family we were raised by, spent our whole lives feeling non-involved. My family was very close to me, my mother and father, but my aunts and uncles, they wouldn't accept me. They wouldn't accept my sister, my brother. There were other two that were adopted. We were not accepted. We didn't belong. They were Norwegian. We were all native. So growing up, I fought and finally met my sister and brought myself back to the Kitwanga area to meet my family, to meet my mother. And I spent half of my life rebuilding, learning about where I'm from and who my family is. And I just think if I didn't do that, my children wouldn't know where they're from and their children wouldn't know where they were from. And is there a way, because I know my family fought to keep me, my grandparents wanted to keep me, but the government said no, they have to go, they've gone through abuse, but the abuse was from them. And is there anything out there that's finding children whose parents maybe like me didn't find their families? Is there something out there looking for these children? Because I know the best thing that happened to me was finding where I came from and knowing where I belong. And I know there's children out there who probably like me don't belong where they are. They're not welcome. They grew up with relatives that don't like them. Are we doing something to bring those children back? Is there a way that we could put a program where our bands would find out if these children are in the system and have the right to go and get our grandchildren back and bring them back to our homes and our families where they'd be loved and belonged? Because my family, even though I never grew up with them, took me in and loved me and made me part of their family immediately when I came back. And that's the way of our people, and that's what I've learned through my journey in life. And it was not an easy journey. And for my sister, it was very hard. So that's my question. Is there anything or any kind of source that we're putting together to find these children and bring these children home? Because maybe their parents are lost, but they don't have to be. Thank you.
Thank you to the panel. That's a lot to unpack. I don't think we need to hear from everybody, but who would like to start?
I can do the technical.
Mike 4.
Yeah, I know we're probably not going to have time, so I may have to have some side conversations, but I just wanted to validate, particularly last speaker, about the fact that that's exactly where we are, which is the doors kicked open to be able to do family reunification, making sure the people that have been blown out through the system can be reconnected to their family, culture, and language, and that governments, First Nations governments, are in charge of that. Now, obviously, resources and other things. The other point I would just make, and I know Terry's comments about what's been gone down in Port Hardy are important, and I'm working with them. I'm working with them now. We're trying to turn the corner there, but there are situations, as we know, in every community that are so awful, so wrong that it's reconciliation sounds like a joke, right? I mean, there are cases where there's going to have to be civil claims. There's going to have to be compensation to people. There's going to have to be apologies. Then there has to be the active work of fixing all of the brokenness that has happened. And I think it's really important that one of the strategic things as this kind of moves into a new way is your governments are not responsible for all. You're going to have to repair. We've all been repairing for years. But there are people who need to be held to account. And I know Cheryl Casimir spoke earlier about the Human Rights Tribunal decision. Children that were removed between 2006 and today on an ongoing basis, there's compensation through the human rights process. There's class actions that are being settled. There's probably new class actions that are going to be taken forward. Like, the mess that is there is not going to be cleaned up overnight. So the people that we're meeting along the way that we know very well, that are our friends and family, we need to support them, even to access some of that. But the bigger issue, of course, is, apologies are not enough. But, we really, in British Columbia, have never had an apology for the debacle of this child welfare system from the province in particular. And we do have, the 60 scoop, the deadline just passed on the 60 scoop piece. One of the things about the Human Rights Tribunal decision, I would just note, again, and Cheryl Casimir told you there's more information for you, there's compensation for parents and grandparents that lost their children. And that's like, I know it says 40,000, but it's 40,000 for every child. So, I know I have lots of examples where there's like 6 and 7 children. And I know it's not enough, but it is very important that we hold them to that and we make them pay something for the human rights abuse. And there's other things. So I know it's not about money, it's about making positive change for the future. But that reconciliation piece is important. And I know, again, just the North Island piece for Terry, they're just, Grand Chief Ed John reviewed it. Many of us have been there, but the issue is now, particularly with this bill coming forward, it's a big, the world does change, like laws do change the world. That's why we push so hard to get C-92. And it's not going to be everything overnight, but you will have tools to make it much more easy. But then we got to use them, right? So we'll be having a lot more discussion and showing a lot more solidarity and support for each other on your journeys. I would just want to say about the funding, there was a couple key issues made about the funding, about the government to government work. the delegated agencies were able to go to actuals, right? But that was the old model, but that was because everyone was so grossly underfunded. And how agencies work are delegated. A lot of those agencies will probably now not be delegated, but will be empowered by their First Nations. So we're now in this big time of change. Like, you know, how people are working together, how we're going to do it is going to have a different basis. The question is, how will the funding flow, right? And how will we do that? Where we are today is at our tables in British Columbia, where we've faced Indigenous services. First Nations Leadership Council has pushed them very hard to open up on an equal basis funding to First Nations that are not in agencies on the same basis as everyone else. So equality, right? So everyone, all rights and title holders pick their governments and they pick how they want their services, and they shouldn't, because of their choice, not get funded. Now, it does make good sense to work together, right, for different reasons, but we're going to have to unravel that mess. So again, in anticipation of that coming, you know, we may think about having even something ready for you to send to Indigenous services to say, like, we need it. I mean, they've been flowing out small amounts of money, but they have not been adequate. And that's been made known to them very strongly. And this legislation doesn't say delegated agencies get X amount of money, other First Nations don't. Like, it doesn't say that. It's principles based on rights and title holders making choices and making sure children are connected. So not removing kids because of poverty affects everybody. Doesn't say, and if you're an independent man, you don't get any money. I mean, this is where we've been pushing back hard, saying there shouldn't be a kind of like play favorites approach, right? It's a coherent policy. So I can say that Indigenous Services Canada, in my dealings with them, they do not have a proper funding arrangement in place. They're under a lot of pressure, and we will need in British Columbia to keep that pressure up and to crack that. It's not answered, but we got to push very hard because it's falling apart, obviously, right? But they're not replacing it with the new one. So the funding issues are critical. Earlier in Cheryl's presentation, she talked about how we are trying to get a fiscal committee together to push and keep pushing, and we are doing that. The province has been very supportive of that as well because they don't know what it means for them, right? So we are going to have to deal with it. So no one has been removed. No one has said you're in this category and you're in that category. Really, this is the new regime on January 1, and it should be stable, predictable, needs-based funding, right? So the new language, you need to adopt it. So you'll be hearing more next week at our meetings about the funding, but we are still pushing a rock up a hill a bit on the funding. But, you know, again, my prediction is we're going to be successful. It's coming, but it's also been punishing not to have it. And the jurisdiction tables that have been working, they've also been underfunded. They've been experimental, exploratory, you know, without a mandate or whatever. Now they're a mandate and they're not experimental and exploratory. So all of that's going to change. There's going to have to be a funding category changed in how Treasury deals with this in Ottawa, that it's a permanent funded line. So it's going to switch pretty quickly. Can you get here? I want to add a couple of things.
I just wanted to thank everybody for their comments and questions, and I think Mary Ellen did a good job in addressing most of them. I did want to just share one piece of information, though, because a lot of the issues that have been raised are the immediate. What we've presented to you is something that's going to be coming down the pipe in the new year. And I know for some it can't come fast enough. But at the same time, I think it provides us an opportunity to get our ducks in a row and to do the work that needs to happen at home in order to be able to assume that jurisdiction and authority. But some of the things that can happen now is in relation to the question about reunification and reconnecting children who are in care to their communities. I just wanted to bring your attention back to the report that Grand Chief Ed John had commissioned a while ago. And during that process, when he was out visiting communities, he found out that leadership didn't know where their children in care were, or didn't know who was in care. So through that work, he was able to kick the door open and provide the opportunity for leadership for here and now to contact the ministry and say, I need a listing of all of my children that are in care. I need to know where they are, because it is your right to know where your children are, where they've been placed, and who they are. So that opportunity is available now. I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you to the panel for speeding your way through that. And as mentioned, you have 2 more days on this topic next week. So encouraging, if you're interested, to be there for that. Hopefully you're registered. Cookby whispered in my ear as you walk by. So there is a registration process. So we're going to transition immediately into the Tripartite First Nations Education Agreement update. Jan Hogan is here from FNESC. Deb Jeffrey is on your agenda, but she went to Ottawa last minute for National Indian Education Council business. So we will get through the next 2, this and health, between now and lunch. We're allowing about 10 minutes each. So we'll try for that. Mic 4.
Yadakshin Wenwen. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Musqueam First Nation. My name's Jan Hogan. I'm Nitlaklapma from Lytton First Nation, and I also work for FNESC. So Tyrone said I had to be really fast, but I don't talk as fast as Debbie Jeffrey, so bear with me. The first issue we want to raise is education jurisdiction. This is an initiative that we've had in place since 2006. We have federal and provincial legislation, and we have First Nations who are working to negotiate agreements. So this is a sectoral education self-government agreement. We ran into a roadblock sometime around 2008 when they applied own source revenue to our agreements, and we got rid of that roadblock and had the policy reversed, so OSR no longer applies to any sectoral self-government agreements. So since about 2016, our negotiating First Nations have been working on updating the template agreement they would sign with Canada. This agreement was updated, and we were told by Canada that they would approve the agreement in late summer. And at that time, we had 6 First Nations getting ready to initial the agreement. So unfortunately, Canada dropped the ball, and due to internal processes and confusion, they did not approve the agreement before the writ was dropped. So again, our initiative has been delayed, and we are now waiting for a new government to be formed and just hoping that they'll pick this initiative up. So needless to say, we're quite disappointed on that front. The second issue we want to highlight are local education agreements. LEAs are a big part of our BCT agreement, as it serves as the main accountability mechanism between First Nations and school districts. And one of the main commitments in BCT is that if a First Nation requests an LEA, a school district now has to enter into an LEA. The second part of that commitment is that BC and FNESC agreed that a provincial LEA will be used as a floor agreement, as it sets out minimum standards required for an effective LEA. The province has now come back with a plan for proposed legislation that falls short of using a provincial LEA, and instead is proposing vague themes be used, and that be used as the floor for the LEA. This is a really important issue because our on-reserve students have a 50% graduation rate. And yesterday I was at an education partners meeting where we found out that 40% of students getting issued the adult dogwood are kids under 18. The adult dogwood is not a graduation certificate that allows you to go to post-secondary. So we know that a lot of our kids are being streamed into that program, so it's really critical that we get the legislation right on the LEAs. So if the province cannot commit to a provincial LEA, we will be requesting that the legislation they're proposing not proceed, as we cannot commit to a process that is less than, given the issues we have with accountability. We also require provincial legislation for our jurisdiction initiative. As I said, we're getting close to signing those jurisdiction agreements, And one of the activities under jurisdiction will be certifying our own First Nation teachers. So we're currently working on a joint initiative with the BC Teachers Regulation Branch on a process to jointly certify First Nation teachers with First Nation standards. And this requires changes to the Teachers Act and the First Nations Education Act. So we're also encountering some pushback from BC on this issue. They're not willing to commit that they'll make this a priority for getting the legislation through in spring 2020. And if these legislative amendments do not go through, it'll cause further delay in implementing jurisdiction. The third issue we want to highlight is the Children and Youth and Care Strategy. The Summit, UBC, and BC AFN have all passed resolutions supporting the development of a children and care education strategy. And we will report more on this next week at the Chiefs meeting on children and families. But we're happy that everyone is very supportive of moving ahead with this strategy. The last issue we want to report on is the transportation for students in public schools. This was another issue that we're trying to solve through BCT. Leading up to BCT, we have been hearing lots of public schools weren't transporting our kids to get to schools, and in some cases, they were even refusing service. So commitment in BCT was for school districts to work with First Nations to develop plans to get our kids to school, and that the funding would be targeted. So this did happen, but some anticipated complications arose, and we don't have enough funding to implement the plans fully. Canada has committed an additional $3 million, and the province an additional $1 million, and FNESC an additional $500,000, but it still isn't enough. So we will be excluding extracurricular activities this year, building our business case to access more funding next year. So needless to say, we're very much looking forward to the legislation on UNDRIP, as we're currently encountering a few issues in our work with BC, and BC living up to their commitments in our BCT agreement. So that's it for my report. Kuksjam.
Thank you, Jan. Mike 10.
I'm just kind of curious about the strikes that happen that impact First Nation students. Is there any way that we can remedy some of that stuff? Because we've already committed the funding for the students to go to school. The school districts have already taken the money, and then when there's a teacher strike, our students are getting left behind. I'm just kind of curious if has FNESC taken any of that in consideration?
We have, and we actually have language in our template LEA that can address that, where school districts are willing to work with First Nations to offer service during strike periods. So there is a clause in our template LEA that you can pull out. I know the last time the teachers had a strike, I worked with a First Nation that didn't even have an LEA, but we used that clause for them to work out an arrangement with the school district.
Mike 12.
Jordan Moldo, Anspiox proxy chief. We have about seven reserves that go to the high school there, and the one thing that we're finding is that there's two streams of education, what you were mentioning before, is that they're not getting, when they leave, they have to do their upgrading when they go back to college. They gotta have another 2 years of upgrading because they're not getting their dogwood and stuff like that. But the thing with that, there's a breakdown of communication with the parents as well, because there's no notification to the parents when they're streaming their students into this kind of category. And sometimes they don't understand that, so it'd be a good idea to have somebody visit those high schools that are doing this, letting them know, letting the parents know, bringing that communication to them, and knowing that, hey, this is what you're doing, because they don't know that. Thanks.
You're probably aware that I'm president of FNESC. I'd respond to that in such a way that we worked with the Ministry of Education. We're highlighting certain school districts that are really underperforming, and we're sending in teams to have conversations, serious conversations with school boards, school administration, And that's certainly a aspect of those conversations. So we're starting with, I believe it's 6 districts, but as the priority, then after that, we'll have similar conversations with other districts as well. Just helping parents hold the system accountable.
The other thing too is that the amount of funding that's going through that school, the amount of money that's being pumped into that school, should be more than enough to adequate for extra people, extra teachers that are going in there. That's not the case because they have a district in the district office is out of the town. So the amount of funding that's going in there, that should be taken into account of what's going in there, because that's federally funded, and I know as First Nations that they get a lot of money that goes through that school, and they should be getting top-notch education for the students.
Absolutely. So Jan will give you her business card on the way out, so you can have follow-up conversations. Sorry, we are really pressed for time. Is that it for questions and comments? Mike 10.
Chief Wayne Christian. This question is for you, Ty, as the president or the head of the FNESC. You know that the evolving legal landscape is going to be shifting in British Columbia in relation to UNDRIP, right? And so with that is the whole issue around the right of self-determination and jurisdiction for nations to take control of. Education, you start listing them all off, they're all there. So what is the thinking, or is even FNESC even looking at the issue of transfer of jurisdictional processes to nation-based entities? You know, like the Secwepemc Nation, we've got 15,000 people, 17 Indian Act communities, 32 communities in total. And we've been having discussions around a nation-based jurisdictional process. So what is FNESC sort of doing along that line as we evolve with the implementation of UNDRIP?
Cook Cookby, the thinking so far is that the jurisdiction process that we've been undertaking for the last 13 or 14 years takes into consideration different local applications of jurisdiction over education. Whether you want to do that on a nation base or individual community or groups of communities, it might be 17, it might be 10 of the 17. But think of it this way, the work we're doing in jurisdiction could and should be a template for your aspirations around education. Whether you take it over in 100% or we provide services in support of you, we're not in control of it. You guys are in control of it. So we do have a group called Negotiating First Nations having those kind of discussions right now. But nobody's really approached us yet on what is a nation, like the 17. It's subsets of that so far, but absolutely open to it. Final comment, Mike 9, and we have to go on.
Why, Chief Bonnie Jacobson, Upper Smilkameen. What I'd like to know is, with all the changes that have happened in the Indian Act in the last 10 years, there's a lot of new students that have just now become First Nations. And are any of the bands being notified? Is there any more funding going into the schooling? Because they entered grade 1 as a regular student, and due to the government discrimination, they are now registered as First Nations. Has that been taken accounted? And are you following up on those numbers? Because there's thousands of them. In my band alone, I've got 40 new elementary kids based all over British Columbia, probably registered under some of your school. So is that money being tracked? Is that money being added?
The funding around that is based on a policy called nominal roll. Regardless if you had 40 or 50 new members given the year, as long as they're entered in nominal roll, they're funded. It's not gray, it's black and white. Now, it won't be necessarily funded in the middle of the school year because nominal roll needs to be met by September 30th in any given school year.
Yeah, but they're nominal rolls. They live all over British Columbia. They're not on the reserve.
Then they come under the province's jurisdiction, which is 1701 form.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that they're not going to go into school and say, hey, I'm First Nation now. Where's the money for those? Like, are you guys tracking what kids have status, what kids don't have status? So the money trail?
But we track kids through the nominal roll and through, which is our process, the federal government's process in our schools and whatnot, and the 1701 process for the province. It's absolutely tracked by student, by school district, by school.
You have to self-identify on the 1701 form whether you're of Indigenous ancestry, and the Ministry of Education does track that, and then you get the targeted funds that go along with identifying.
Okay, that's my missing piece because my students don't know that. I don't know that.
What my school district does, our Aboriginal committee, our Indigenous committee, is we send out a notice this time of year saying all Indigenous families, when that form comes around, tick yes, because it does mean additional funding for students and possibly additional services. So if you have means of communicating.
Sorry, we're out of time. Can you just drop off a business card on your way by?
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Jan. I'm going to turn it over to Don.
Thank you, Jan, for your presentation. We will be moving on with our agenda, so thank you for being gracious with our time today, Haijka.
Cooks, Jim.
At this time, I'd like to invite up First Nations Health Council Chair. The information for the next agenda item can be found in tab 5, page 393.
Good morning. My name is Charlene Bellew. I am from the Eskedin First Nation from Alkali Lake. I'd like to acknowledge the Musqueam people for allowing us into their lands to do our business today, and thank them for the great food and taking care of us. Before I begin, I'd like to also congratulate Grand Chief Stuart Phillip for his ongoing leadership over the years. I remember Grand Chief Stuart Phillip's story about making his way up to the First Nations summit offices to begin the process of the Leadership Council and the important work that they continue to do together between the BCAFN, UBCIC, and the First Nations Summit. So again, just thank you. So as they were able to develop the relationships back then, I acknowledge their leadership, again, the UBCIC, the Summit, and BCAFN, for their vision for a better health for our people at the First Ministers' meeting way back starting in 2005. There was an MOU that was to guide the relationship between the Leadership Council and the First Nations Health Council. We have work to do to renew that MOU with the Leadership Council. We do have a meeting coming up with them in November where there's a lot of the topics that they are reporting on at this meeting, including child and family, housing, education, that we really need to find a way to work together on instead of having separate tables. So I look forward to how those kind of topics can support the work on social determinants in health. So I want to again thank them for the work they do there. One of the key documents that outline the governance framework and a lot of the questions that you're getting by letters about the First Nations Health Council, one of the key documents is the consensus paper that the chiefs and leaders in 2011 passed. It was a BC First Nations perspective on a new health governance agreement that was endorsed again by the chiefs back in 2011. That specific document provided the First Nations Health Council mandate. It also established the regional caucuses that are held in your regions every fall and spring, and also gathering wisdom as a forum for discussion and addressing concerns. Those are held every 18 months. Those processes were established by the leaders as processes for accountability and transparency. Gathering Wisdom 2010 will be celebrating 10 years of success. I acknowledge all of the past leaders and any of you that have had any role in the First Nations Health Council or the First Nations Health Authority. There's a lot of work that's happened in 10 years. So January 14th, 15th, and 16th, if you've got your calendars, you can mark those as Gathering Wisdom, where we will celebrate a lot of the success. Again, the 2011 consensus paper outlined, the chiefs and leaders outlined the governance process and explicitly outlined to keep the politics separate from the business of health. The First Nations Health Council were never to interfere with the business of the Board of Directors or the operations of the First Nations Health Authority. Simply, the First Nations Health Authority delivers programs and services. The Health Council is to advocate and provide political leadership. The First Nations Health Directors from your communities provide technical advice to both organizations. Just coming current, one of the other things that I think is important for you to know is that there's a legal requirement with the First Nations Health Council, Health Authority, to have an evaluation every 5 years. That's a legal requirement of the tripartite framework agreement. So currently there's 7 evaluations that are being completed and will be tabled at the fall caucus sessions that are scheduled within your respective regions, and also will be reported out at Gathering Wisdom. Again, so this is the first of a 5-year period where those evaluations are being done. The regional engagement sessions will provide an opportunity for feedback. We're in a period of transformation. The first few years of the work of the First Nations Health Council and the Health Authority was to do health transfer. Funds have now been transferred to your communities, where this is an opportunity to transform health. How do you want to see health delivered differently within your nations? So it's an opportunity, again, I think, to improve the health services within your respective communities. Specific questions around leadership transition and the resolutions that were at the BCAFN and also on this agenda. The terms of reference of the First Nations Health Council have provisions for change of leadership. In July of 2019, there was a change of leadership. There were 5 regional representatives, Chief Willie Blackwater from the north, Ernest Armand from the coastal, Derek Hansen from the Fraser Salish, Les Dorian from Victoria, and myself that sat to look at a transition. And it was at that point that I was appointed interim chair and Les was appointed deputy chair. Both of those were confirmed in an August meeting of the First Nations Health Council. Those decisions to change leadership were in camera and remain confidential. The legal opinions are privileged and confidential because I take note that there is a request for that information in your band council resolutions. And as leaders, I'm sure that while you deal with your staff challenges, you know that those information is confidential to your respective communities. In terms of the resolution on regionalization, those will be addressed at the fall 2019 caucuses and again at Gathering Wisdom. Resolution on transparency, again, and accountability will be addressed at the caucus and Gathering Wisdom. Some of the challenges that I've seen, I've only been on the Health Council for about 2 years, but I see where we need a lot of work to improve the governance structure of the Health Council and the Health Authority. It doesn't seem, right now, there's dual roles. So I sit as a Health Council member, but I also sit as a member that provides direction to the Board of Directors. You know, it doesn't seem to fit. It doesn't seem people know when to sit as a Health Council member or as a member of the society. Mixing roles is very easy in what there currently is. There are questions of operations where we really have no business in the operations of the Health Authority. They have staff and the Board of Directors oversee the administration. Some of the other challenges that I see with the terms of reference And again, it's here for leadership to consider. And questions that I've asked since I started on the Health Council is, there's a call for an evaluation of the First Nations Health Council. This has never been done in the duration of the Health Council's work. In 2015 especially, there was a call for a substantive review of the First Nations Health Council terms of reference. This was at the direction of the leaders, but that's never been done. So, and as the chair, whether it's the former chair or myself today, you know, it's a part of our responsibility to provide leadership to the Health Council, evaluate the performance and progress that we may be making or not making, and how do we improve that? You know, so if we had taken time to do those evaluations, perhaps we wouldn't be in this situation. Also, I think that, you know, it's important for leaders to know that in the First Nations Health Council, there are positions of chair and deputy chair that are covered and paid and reported out by the audits and reports that are made by the Health Authority. The chair, in the review of the documents that I have, the chair is eligible for 240 working days, which translates to about $168,000 per year, and an additional $15,000 annual retainer, for a total of about $183, plus travel expenses to do the work of the chair. The deputy chair is eligible for 118 days for approximately $59,000 and a retainer of $11,000 for a total of approximately $70,000 per year, plus travel expenses. In terms of just some of the issues raised in the letter, and just in closing, there's reference to lateral violence and blatant politicking. It's, I know I've had my share of bullying, you know, within the Health Council, but I've been able to stand up to that and to stop that from happening to myself within the Health Council, and hopefully others have been able to have a voice as well. There's much healing and health to do within the Health Council, within the Health Authority, and within the health directors. There's a lot of healing to rebuild relationships with our Indigenous organizations, the First Nations Leadership Council, FNESC, Child and Family Services, all of those organizations, we've never been at the table with them, and we would like to, so that we can continue to work on the social determinants of health together instead of at separate tables. There's a lot of trust that we have to reestablish with our government partners, but we've started that work. I've been in meetings with deputies, and I've been in meetings with ministers where the change is good for ourselves. This work again begins with us. Again, I want to just be able to close in saying that we don't have time in health, education, your agendas are full, to undermine one another. We need to be able to hold up each other. We need to remember why we're here. This is for our people, the health of our people, and we need to learn from this. Like, how are we not going to have this happen again? To me, it's by the leaders engaging in the terms of reference, perhaps approving the terms of reference, perhaps having a say in who your Health Council chair and deputy chair would be. The opportunity for that kind of discussion will happen at your fall caucus sessions that are scheduled, and also at Gathering Wisdom coming up in January. Gukshem.
Thank you, Charlene. Just to remind everyone that we will be having a further discussion. There is a resolution that's being tabled on this, and I would ask that we have a further discussion when that resolution comes to the floor. Being aware that we do have an honoring of David Dennis that's taking place over our lunchtime, and that we do need to have time to eat and also to witness that celebration. So with your permission, Chiefs, I would ask that we table this discussion or any further discussions for when the resolution comes to the floor. Thank you, Chiefs, and thank you, Charlene, for the update provided this morning. Thank you. Would call on our elder to bless our food at this time.
Mike 1.
So let us be grateful for what we're about to receive. I bless the food and the hands who prepared it. Amen.
HCA, thank you. So we'll reconvene at 12:45 for quite a short lunch.